I thank the Honourable Minister for his statement. The next speaker is Honourable Clement Rohee.
Mr. Speaker, let me make it clear from the very outset that any piece of legislation that comes before this House that criminalizes terrorism, that condemns terrorism, whichever part of the world, it would rear its ugly head. Extremism, which is a manifestation of terrorism, the People's Progressive Party, civic, wholeheartedly and totally, unequivocally would support. And we don't need to regale this honorable House about this matter, precisely because the whole history of the People's Progressive Party speaks to this track record. Anyone who does the research, notwithstanding the recent manifestations of terrorism and the need to introduce legislation of this type, the fact of the matter is that the People's Progressive Party's civic record stands unblemished in this respect. The honorable member, Mr. Nagamoto, the Prime Minister of this country, when they attempted, I should say, in the last sitting, to railroad this bill through the Parliament, made a statement to the effect, Mr. Speaker, that, and I will quote what he said, it's in the handshake, that the PPP's obstruction to the bill is tantamount to providing succor to the criminal enterprise. I don't think the honorable member knew what or the weight of the statement that he made. But then when I listened to the honorable member Basil Williams making inferences rather loosely in respect of recruitment of terrorists and the training of terrorists, let us not go back to history, Mr. Speaker. I think we need to, in this debate, avoid that. Because there's so much in history that could unearth. I don't think, Mr. Speaker, now is the time for this country, since we are on the eve of the independence 50th anniversary celebrations, to go down that road. And I would wish to appeal to the honorable members on that side of the House, now that they are in government, to be a little more careful and guarded in their statements on matters of this type. Now, the honorable member Basil Williams has a reputation for guile.
Guile, not guile.
He has a reputation for guile. And he just displayed some of it, speaking about democracy and so forth. But I will pass that, Mr. Speaker. I wouldn't dwell on that. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
You say Basil is not worth anything?
Mr. Speaker, yes, we do agree that in today's world, the whole question of the need to have legislation of this nature is obviously necessary. We agree that it's a global fight. Guyana is part of the global village, and we cannot fight this matter in the same way we cannot fight the fight against drug trafficking, trafficking in small arms, or any other malady of a universal nature. And therefore, we are obliged to be part of this journey. The problem, however, Mr. Speaker, as we knew when we were in government, I think it was under the stewardship of the then sitting president, Mr. Jack Dew, that we found it necessary to establish a governance unit at the ministry which he headed, or the office that he headed, or the office of the president, it was known at that time. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, that passing legislation of this type, while it is important and necessary and to some extent mandatory, the problem rests with fulfilling your obligations. This is where the challenge lies, Mr. Williams, honorable member.
People.
Fulfillment of the obligations in many of these conventions and treaties poses challenges to small nations such as us, ours, who lack, or if not lack, do not have the capacity, human resources, technological and otherwise, to do so. And so while we laud the effort, Mr. Speaker, in respect of moving in this direction, the challenge will come afterward, because I noticed even in today's press conference by the Commissioner of Police, he himself recognized some of the challenges that the force will face in addressing these matters. And in fact, a delegation that came to Ghana from SIGTED some years ago, in their first report of their visit to deal with this question, recognized this problem. And so this is one of the challenges, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we need to address. Mr. Speaker, while the bill has done what did not exist in the past, which is to criminalize many of these terrorist actions, inherent in this issue we must take into consideration the whole question of balancing enforcement and the human rights of those who will be targeted and who will be investigated by the police. Now, the bill speaks to this matter. And when you speak about a democracy, Mr. Speaker, and since Guyana is party to a host of human rights conventions and obligations, let us not overlook, in our zeal and our zest, to pass this piece of legislation, overlook the human rights issues that are connected to the fight against terrorism. To strike the balance, This is where the challenge lies. How to strike the balance between what we are aspiring to do vis-a-vis this piece of legislation and the human rights of the individuals that might be caught up in this matter. So that the safeguards, Mr. Speaker, the safeguards that ought to come in the regulations that should accompany this bill is what we were expecting in the not-too-distant future. Civil society, although the honourable member has not made this point, and by the way, we were somewhat upset over the fact that over the Christmas holidays, we noticed an advertisement in the newspaper inviting persons to a meeting or consultation at the convention center, which was to be held on the Monday immediately after the holidays. Time may be of the essence.
Don't be sidetracked.
Time may be of the essence, Mr. Speaker, but more haste, less speed.
Agreed, right.
More haste, less speed.
Agreed.
Mr. Speaker,
Continue making that point.
Guyana looks to this piece of legislation, or the People Progressive Party Civic looks to this piece of legislation with mixed feelings, Because while we support the government's efforts to comply with its international obligations vis-à-vis these conventions or the countering or financing of terrorism laws, we want to draw attention to certain matters which we believe. Not that they've been overlooked, because we haven't heard anything to that effect. But the whole question, Mr. Speaker, of vesting in the law enforcement certain powers, which when balanced against the criminal justice system, must be seen as a very delicate matter. And all around the world, this is a challenge. Key to pursuing this legislation, Mr. Speaker, is a fundamental challenge which countries like ours face. That is to say, the porous nature of our borders. Now, Mr. Williams made a statement, which I made a note of, where he said that one person single-handedly could commit an act of terrorism, along the lines of any one of the offenses mentioned in the legislation, in the proposed legislation. That is true. But at the same time, it poses the question about, and I return to this question again, at the same time it poses the question about whether we have the necessary and requisite resources to ensure that the returning persons or fighters trained by ISIS, trained by Al-Qaeda, trained by Boko Haram, and who are traversing the Caribbean, the statistics are there and speaks for itself, that have the possibility of entering our country because of our porous borders. We know what the challenge is because we've been in the government. You will now be aware of what the challenges are, even more than you knew when you were in the opposition. And let us not underestimate, Mr. Speaker, with all these foreign fighters returning in light of what is happening now in Syria and Iraq. And we know that many of them have come from Caribbean countries. We know that. You ought to know that too, because you have the resources at your disposal to be knowledgeable of this. Mr. Speaker, there's a strong possibility. I'm not being too predictive on this one, but all that I'm saying, there's a strong possibility for terrorists, not of the homegrown type that Mr. Williams was trying to implicate in this house, but of the type that we know, that are moving around the world and seeking climates, politically that is, such as ours, to nestle and to create the necessary cells, as we saw in the case of those who were in Guyana and were plotting terrorist activities in the United States. We have that experience. The final point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is this. The bill in its form, in its present form, in my view, and I would like the honorable member, Mr. Williams, to clarify this for me. Because when I read in the bill that the offenses does not speak or do not have political implications or a political flavor. I ask myself the question, Mr. Speaker, how is it you can have so many offenses that, in fact, if executed or when executed, are in fact politically motivated? Politically motivated. At the same time, you have a clause 49 in the bill which says, Mr. Speaker, clause 49. Quote, Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of extradition and mutual assistance, the offenses under this act shall not be regarded as political offenses or as offenses connected with a political offense or offenses inspired by political motives. Now, there's a philosophical underpinning here, because it is known that terrorist activities are usually influenced by religious convictions, cultural convictions, and when executed becomes a political act. Becomes a political act. And that is why I was somewhat confused, Mr. Speaker, when the honorable member was making inferences about local terrorists. How could this be juxtaposed with?
This is the third time, I'm not point of order. Standing order 48. I don't know how, and these rules do not permit that a member cannot draw an inference and impute an inference in another member, especially if the inference is capable of being interpreted to mean that you're criminalizing somebody, or fixing somebody with some kind of crime, or anything in that genus. Unless I say specifically what the Honorable Member Rohee is saying, then I'll ask him to rejoin that remark. But he cannot interpret what I'm saying to mean that. Because I could say what I want. I don't have to give you an inference. I don't need you to.
Remember, will you please proceed?
I wouldn't go there.
Don't go there.
Don't, man. Just go
You're
on.
doing very well.
Proceed.
So I'm dealing with the fundamental issue of a terrorist act being political
Yeah.
or being non-political. This is a serious issue, Mr. Speaker. My own view is that an act of the nature as described, as spelled out in the draft legislation, is political. It's political. And therefore, to seek to obviate acts of terrorism other than political, I believe is a serious error of political judgment. And not only that, but the experiences of other countries around the world. So I would wish the honorable member, Mr. Speaker, to make some clarification on this matter when he returns to his feet. Mr. Speaker, the legislation, the draft legislation, in its present form, I would say is progressive and commendable, but in the context, there are still issues that require further consultation, Mr. Speaker. Further consultation. It is too serious a bill, or the matters dealt with in this piece, in this bill, is too serious a matter. Let us not underestimate that when we promulgate this little piece of legislation, and when the president assents to this thing and makes it law, without the regulations, and by the way, to conclude, Mr. Speaker, a group of experts had recommended that what should have happened here was that the government, that was at the time we were in the government, but as the honorable member of the leader of the opposition said, the king is dead, long live the king. What we left, we inherit. Yes. So they had recommended, Mr. Speaker, that a strategy be formulated, and on the basis of that strategy, the legislation or the strategy would form the framework for the legislation to be drafted. What happened is that they went ahead with the legislation in the absence of the strategy. And I believe they haven't missed the boat in a sense, Mr. Speaker. They can still do the strategy. But they would require consultation and more time from the population out there. So while the strategy in this document ought to have gone hand in hand, we don't have that reality right now with us. We have the legislation without the strategy and the regulations. I would like to appeal to the members on the government benches, Mr. Speaker, to bring the necessary stakeholders together to formulate a strategy to deal with anti-terrorism and the matters that are involved here. And then we could take it from there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the honourable member for his statement.